Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 440 chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it won't start, and if it does start, it won't idle. So with most of my repairs, the first thing I like to do is look into the fuel tank. And looking into this one, the fuel looks fresh enough. I don't smell anything crazy. Let's just dump it out and see what we got in here. I like using this funnel because I can also dump that fuel right back into the tank if I choose to. So we got mixed fuel that smells good. Didn't see any water in the bottom of the tank. Don't think the fuel itself is the problem. The next thing I like to do is remove the fuel filter for examination and see if it's dirty or not. And this one actually looks like it was recently replaced. Then I'm going to remove the filter and I'm going to pressurize the fuel line. I'm going to put 10 pounds of pressure on here and see if it holds. And it's not holding. I can't even pump it up to 10 pounds. And I can hear air movement as well. So the fact that I can't pressurize it means there's either a hole in the fuel line or there's something going on inside the carburetor. I can definitely hear air coming out through the air filter base. So that tells me that the fuel line's probably good, although I can test that individually if I'd want to. But most likely there's something going on inside the carburetor, and that's why I hear air rushing. It's probably also why the saw won't run. Now before I dig into that carburetor, I want to look into the cylinder. Spark plug looks okay, but wet. I'm checking for scoring. Even if the cylinder is roached, I'm not going to move forward with a carburetor repair. But it did look okay in there, although it was a little bit wet. Now that being wet might be a clue. Alright, just going to blow away a little bit of schmutz here before I pull the carburetor off. I was just looking at see how old the saw was. It's a 2023 model. You know, that's only 3 years old. A stiff metering diaphragm. That would be kind of soon for seeing that type of a problem. But you never know. So to remove this carburetor, and this is one of Husky's bigger pain in the butt carbs to get off. There is a funny little clip right here that holds a bracket that contains the throttle rod. You can kind of get underneath it and pop it loose. Once it's loose, you can just pull that throttle rod out of the trigger handle and move the whole assembly to the side. You're not going to be able to remove the throttle rod at this point, but you don't have to. Just push it off to the side. Now I'm removing the air filter base from the rubber bushing that kind of locates it, and then removing the last two screws that hold the carburetor air filter base through the carburetor to the intake. Kind of got to pry these screws out of here once they're loose. Even this part of it's kind of a pain in the butt. There we go, we got them out. Now to try and get this air filter base out of here, we got a lot of things going on. The stop switch kind of is wedged against the front of the fuel tank. The primer bulb is pushed into a enclosure there. That red stop switch is also part of it wrapped around the choke lever. Now there's a tab on top here holding the carburetor in place. And once we loosen that tab, we can remove the carb. Now we still have a fuel line on here. This is the main line that comes from the tank. And there you go. We harvested a carburetor. Now if we wanted to, we could pressure test that fuel line at this point. We just plug the end by the carburetor and put 10 pounds on the filter end. I chose not to do that. I'm just going to go right to pressure testing the carburetor alone. Let's see if it'll hold. So that's not normal. When I pump up that air pump, I should be able to put 10 pounds of pressure on that carb and not have any leaking at all. It should just hold. The fact that it's leaking, usually two possibilities. One would be a stiff metering diaphragm that's holding the needle open. The other one would be dirt or schmutz under the needle or in the needle and seat that's allowing it not to seat and let air past. So let's open this carburetor up and see what we got going on inside here. Alright, we took our 4 screws out, and there's our metering diaphragm. I'm going to peel it off of there and look at it, or are we just going to hold it here for a while? There we go. It looks like it's a little bit stiff. It kind of holds a position when I move it. And it's possible that it was holding the needle open. Now, if someone had reassembled this incorrectly, we could have the same results. I think the reason that I'm fumbling around here so much is that it doesn't really seem like that's the only problem. Now I'm taking a look at the metering lever, and that looked like it was set at the proper height. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a carb kit in here, and then I'll repressure test it and see if we fixed it. So we have our new needle. We're going to mount it to the metering lever. Put our cross pin in there. Lay our spring on top of the carburetor. And then just set this needle assembly right in there. Now I should point out that, and I don't think I showed it here, when I took the other needle out, I did clean up the seat a little bit, blew a little bit of compressed air in there. And while I didn't see any physical debris, it looked like there was something going on in there. It was discolored. Maybe there was some kind of fine something or other in there. But after I hit it with the air, it looked perfectly clean. Nice piece of brass without any weird marks or rings in it. We're kind of moving here double speed through the reassembly process, because really right now we're just stacking gaskets. If you put it together the way it was taken apart, you should be fine. These particular style carburetors, it can be easy to get those gaskets put together in the wrong order or oriented the wrong way. So just be mindful of that. You noticed when I took this apart, I had scribed the side of the carburetor with a screwdriver. And the point of that was, so when I put this plate on here and the other pump section, if there was any confusion, I could just look at that scribe mark and make sure it was right. So now when we put 10 pounds of pressure on here, it holds. The problem was either the metering diaphragm or schmutz in the seat of the needle, or a combination of both. It really doesn't matter which one it was. There's no test on this at the end. If we fix it and it works for the customer, I mean, bottom line, that's that, right? I'm not going to waste any time trying to figure out which one was the right answer. So we snap the carburetor back into place. It should hold right there now for the rest of the assembly process. You'll notice that rod right there, that's the choke arm. And the red lever has a spout that receives that choke arm. So when we put that air filter base back in here, we'll have to be mindful of that as well. Now I slid that bushing over the end of the throttle rod, push the primer bulb into that recess that holds it, pushing the fuel line on the primer bulb that goes from the carburetor to the primer on the short stem. And then the return line that goes back to the tank goes on the long stem of the primer bulb. Air filter base is kind of in place. The choke rod is in place on the red choke lever. Everything's really close to where it should be. Not 100%. You can see I'm wiggling around a little bit. Setting it down, the air filter base pin into the bushing that locates it. Here we go. And then getting the throttle rod into the trigger handle and pushing that guide over the snap retainer that holds that rod in place. Alright, in goes a bolt. Not tightening it down yet. I got to get the other bolts in place. Once I have all three bolts started, see if we can get this one in. Then I can snug them all down. Here we go. Throttle rod is snapped down into place. Choke lever appears to work. The high fast idle function seems to work. There's a little locating slot for that fuel line. It all looks good. Let's put some fuel in here. You'll notice that I'm going to put his fuel back in. That's why I like that funnel. It works really good for that. I don't think there's anything wrong with his fuel. And by putting it in there, I'm also kind of confirming that what I did was the right thing. And it had nothing to do with fuel. Hitting the purge bulb, it seems to be pumping up just fine. Don't have any issues with that. Let's see if it'll start. It didn't start. Any ideas why? You could see there at the end of the pulling cycle, I was holding the throttle open and pulling on the cord. I would have done that if I thought the thing was flooded. Now, that carburetor wasn't holding pressure, and we think the needle was hung open, which means the customer probably pulled and pulled and pulled and flooded this thing. And right now I'm going to try and clear any fuel that's sitting in the bottom of that crankcase. And I know there was, because there wasn't a ton on top of the piston. It was wet, but it wasn't like fuel was puddled there. And because this is flooded and it doesn't start, you can see all that fuel coming out. Yeah, look at all the fuel that's on the plug. You know, I'm going to try and dry this thing. Get it started. I was just confirming there that I have spark. Not something I checked in the beginning. Kind of right away went to the carburetor when we had no pressure. So let's try this again. So first of all, you notice that it smoked like a Canadian wildfire. It was flooded. We got that whole running issue, won't start problem fixed. But what was going on with that chain? It seemed really tight. It was, as soon as I let off the throttle, the chain would immediately stop. There was no coasting like you'd normally see. So something's going on here. There's possibilities would be, you know, if the chain ever fell off, maybe some of the drivers are burred and they're dragging in the bar groove. We see that a lot. A lot of times, though, the chain won't even turn when you have that situation. Let's just see if it runs normal. So we had a huge load on this thing. Bar looks straight. The chain, you know, just a quick visual glance. I don't see any burnt drivers. So I don't think the chain fell off and then was reinstalled with any problems. It looks pretty normal. In fact, all the drivers look really shiny. So let's see what we're working with here. We have a 325 50 gauge bar, and it's stamped right there on the bar. We can read it. So we're going to get our measuring tool for the chain and the bar. We're going to lay the 3/8. We'll use those two grooves, and it doesn't line up with the rivets, so it's not a 3/8 chain. Then we're going to look at the 325, and sure enough, it is the correct pitch chain. It's a 325. Now the other part of this tool will measure the gauge. It's not a 43, it's not a 50, it's a 58. Well, I just told you the bar was 50 gauge, and we can confirm that here. What I'm doing now actually is I'm dropping the 58 in there to see if it fits. And if it does, then that 50 gauge bar is worn way beyond its limits. And the 58, it kind of slipped in there if I pushed on it in some spots. What we're going to do is we're going to try and put the right chain on here, a 325 50 gauge. And later on, I'll drop it in a log and I'll see if it cuts straight or not. If we got to put a $50 bar on here on top of everything else, you know, it's going to get kind of pricey. So we'll try the replacement chain and see what happens. If it cuts a big smiley in a log when I'm cutting through, then I'll have to go back and get a different bar. Sometimes I have some used bars I can offer the customer. So I'll get this mounted up here and we'll do a test run on it and see what it sounds like with the proper chain on there. And if it sounds good, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 440 chainsaw that came in with a complaint that it wouldn't start. Turns out it also had the wrong chain on it. Thanks for watching. Later.